Why is this Pro controller from 8BitDo so good? How does it have twice as many functions as the official Nintendo Switch Pro controller despite coming in at exactly the same price? How has it basically eliminated Joy-Con drift? And finally, why have I made it my main controller for all of my docked handhelds? Well, I'm NihongoGamer, and this is no ordinary controller. Sure, on the surface it may look a lot like Nintendo's official Pro controller, but go a little bit deeper and you'll find that basically it's better in almost every single aspect except for one. Okay, maybe two. But for everything else, you'd be crazy to go back to Nintendo's offering. They're calling it the ultimate controller, which may be pushing it a little bit far, but at this price point, it most likely is the ultimate option. See, the main reason you'd even be considering this controller is that for one reason or another, you don't want the official Nintendo Pro controller. I actually have a separate video on it, but to cut a long story short, I sold my official controller because the Nintendo D-pad just didn't do it for me. I was making accidental jumps all the time in fighting games, and that was really frustrating because, truth be told, I actually really liked everything else about the official pad. So for this ultimate controller to impress me, it has to do at least one of two things. The first is it has to have a better D-pad than the official Pro controller, and fortunately, it's marginally better. But I'll explain that in more detail later. The second thing it has to do is improve on what the official Pro controller already does well, and that includes things like feeling solid in the hands, being comfortable to hold, having buttons that are fast and responsive, and being as reliable as an official product. Well, on that front, the Ultimate controller most certainly delivers, and with 2.4G wireless, an included docking station, complete customization through a smartphone app, 3 selectable profiles, and reduced risk of stick drift, well, you'll soon be wondering why you haven't already gone out and bought one. Just to be clear, I've bought my own 8BitDo controllers for videos before, but this Ultimate controller was sent to me for the purposes of making this video. I don't have to send it back, and all opinions are entirely my own. Now, before we continue dunking on other controllers, let's see what you actually get in the box. First up is the controller itself. It looks very similar to the official Pro controller, but it has a number of extra buttons on the front, analog triggers in case you're using it on PC as a regular pad, and on the back it has 2 back buttons. I wish I had 4 of them, but remember, at this price you can buy 2 or 3 of these pads compared to many Pro controllers with analog triggers and back buttons. In addition to the controller itself, you get a docking station which charges the controller and pulls it into place magnetically, so you can literally drop it in place without having to slide it carefully into a USB port. In addition to providing a clean place to store the controller when not in use, it also has a secret ninja compartment in the base for hiding the 2.4G wireless dongle, which most people will think they don't need, but ended up being one of my favorite features of this controller. Okay, so the 8BitDo Ultimate controller is basically a Nintendo Switch Pro controller, but with a docking station, right? Well, no, actually it goes much deeper than that, and the differences don't really show up until you really start using this controller. The analog sticks are similar in size and shape, but feature a studded texture on the rims, unlike the concentric circles of the Nintendo pad. It also uses a slightly nicer rubberized plastic, which offers a more premium, satin-like feel for your thumbs, which will be in contact with them for hundreds of hours. Underneath, it goes even further because it uses Hall effect sensors instead of the traditional potentiometers used in most other analog sticks. In theory, this means they're less likely to drift over time, which more often than not requires outright controller replacement, which is expensive and, to be honest, just leads to more environmental waste. I didn't experience any stick drift while trying it, but ask me a year from now and I'll let you know whether it lived up to the promise. Next up are the face buttons. You might never have noticed it, but on the official Nintendo controller, the 4 face buttons are uncommonly flat, spaced far apart, and actually not even spaced equally. Because it uses a flattened diamond layout, vertically the buttons are close together, but horizontally the Y and A buttons are like 2 miles apart. It's not like this on the original Joy-Cons, and honestly, I don't see much need for it. By contrast, the Ultimate controller uses more traditional face buttons that are round in shape, spaced closer together, and laid out in a regular diamond shape, so pressing multiple buttons at the same time felt just that little bit easier to me. Now, where it really starts to get interesting is the top of the controller. The R1 and L1 shoulder buttons have less surface area than the official controller, and they're not as loose either. This means you're less likely to actuate them by accident, but I'm actually on the fence for this one. Having a stiffer feel means you have to be more deliberate with your button presses, and over time, this could be a little more tiring. But that's personal preference. They're not stiff, they're just not crazy loose like the official controller. Moving down to the triggers, this is the biggest difference. Instead of digital buttons like on Joy-Cons or on the Switch Pro controller, the Ultimate controller features full-on analog triggers. You might think this is just for PC games, but even for Switch games, this means you get a more PlayStation or Xbox-like experience, where the button is actuated at a specific point while pulling the trigger. On the Joy-Cons or on the official controller, you've only got one option. on or off. But on the Ultimate controller, just slide this bar on the smartphone app and you can set the triggers to actuate with only the slightest touch, giving you the fastest possible response. Or if you prefer, you can set it so that you pull the trigger much further before your attack actually comes out. This is super useful if you use the trigger buttons for macros like burst attacks that you really don't want to actuate by accident, which would leave you open to a huge punish combo. When it comes to customization, that's only the beginning. The app is a free download for your iPhone or Android smartphone, and of course you can use the PC software too. This is where the Ultimate controller is hiding a huge amount of its potential. Think the analog sticks are too sensitive? Increase the dead zone. Think it's too much effort tilting sticks all the way to run places? Pull the active area away from the edges and give your thumbs a break. Hate things that vibrate? Turn the vibration motors down or off entirely. Want to remap the controller so you can switch weapons without taking your thumbs off the analog sticks or just play completely left-handed? Go right ahead. And like the 8BitDo arcade stick I reviewed last year, you can program pretty much any button to be an entire combo. Would it be tournament legal? Absolutely not. Would anyone know if you used it online? I'll let you decide whether you think cheating is going to lead to any sort of real satisfaction. I can't stress enough just how easy it is to do all this with the app. It connects to the controller via Bluetooth, but that doesn't mean you have to unpair from the Switch to make the changes. I make all my adjustments in the app while testing out the changes in real time in-game. I have no idea how they accomplished this, but it seems to work, so I'm not going to complain. One weird bonus that 8BitDo doesn't seem to be advertising is how the profile switching works. When you open up the app, the first thing it does is ask you to choose whether you're making changes to Windows profiles or Switch profiles. That means instead of 3 profiles, you actually have 6 because the controller saves them as completely separate things. Another thing they don't really mention is that you can use the controller in default mode too, which means anytime you want to use the controller without any customizations at all, just press the profile button until none of the LEDs are lit and bam, you have a 4th profile which is clean and default. So when you really think about it, the Ultimate controller doesn't have 3 profiles, it has 8. Enough! Custom profiles, cheating macros, docking stations, none of that stuff really matters if the controller doesn't actually feel good to play. Well, like I said, this controller is highly based on the design of the official Nintendo Switch Pro controller, so if you didn't really like this, then please don't expect the Ultimate controller to feel wildly different. But if, like me, you actually really like the feel of the official Nintendo Switch Pro controller, then not only are you going to like the Ultimate controller, you're also going to find a few things that you like better. When you first pick it up, you'll feel right at home with the rounded handles, which drop your fingers within reaching distance of anything you'd need to press quickly. It's not quite as rounded as the official controller though, and if I had to choose, I'd say that the rounded handles of the official controller are still a more satisfying shape to hold. That being said, the flatter edges of the 8BitDo are still rounded in all the right places, and something that works particularly well are the back buttons and shoulder buttons. Back buttons are really hit and miss on other controllers, but the 8BitDo uses molded paddles that are completely out of the way when you're not using them, and easy to press when you do want them. Think of them like grips. When you want to press them, you just squeeze them. Some other controllers require you to do unnatural movements like pushing the button in with the tip of your finger, so I much prefer the style used here on the Ultimate controller. Moving up to the shoulder buttons, the official controller has slim shoulder buttons, and the ergonomics of the controller really guide your fingers to go straight to the triggers instead. Reaching up to hit the shoulder buttons has always felt kind of awkward to me on the official controller, but on the Ultimate controller, the shape of the molded grips don't do this quite as much, so it felt just as natural to me to rest my fingers on the shoulder buttons as it was to rest them on the triggers. Since the shoulder buttons aren't super slim and they're contoured to flow into the shape of the triggers, I also found that jumping between shoulder button and shoulder trigger with the same finger was easier and felt more natural. The analog sticks are, as I mentioned earlier, slightly different texture and feel, but mechanically they're very similar to the official Pro controller. The Ultimate controller feels ever so slightly stiffer, but it's so slight that it could easily have just been my imagination. What definitely wasn't my imagination, however, was the stiffness of the D-pad. The D-pad is the part of the controller I am especially picking about because I play a lot of fighting games. Now, fighting games don't especially use the D-pad very differently to other games, but if you only really play games like platformers where you jump with a button, there are a lot of issues that you might just completely overlook on something like the D-pad on a Pro controller. Fighting games really are the true test when it comes to the D-pad on these Pro controllers, and on the Ultimate controller, it's certainly better than on the official Nintendo Switch Pro controller. But would I use the Ultimate controller for fighting games? Well, that's where it gets a little bit more complicated. On a very base level, a D-pad has to pass some easy tests. The first one is simultaneous inputs. If opposing directions can be actuated at the same time, then various fighting game commands will get cancelled out. Well, good news, the Ultimate controller has a pivot in the middle, so it's passed the first test. But the next test, and this is a significantly harder one to pass, is accidental diagonals. Like I said before, in a platform or action game, you're unlikely to notice this issue because pressing up doesn't cause cause Mario to do something as obvious as jump. But in a fighting game, jumping is the most dangerous of committed actions, and all you have to do is press up left, or up right. The 8BitDo uses a plus-shaped D-pad popularized by Nintendo since the early days, and although it's better than a circle-shaped D-pad, it's still very, very easy to push up or down by accident, even if you think you're only pressing left or right. It's not as bad as the official Pro Controller, but this is only because the D-pad is quite stiff. You have to be more deliberate when pressing the D-pad, and so tapping left or right doesn't cause accidental jumps as much as the official Pro Controller. But if you hold it down for longer, you'd better have very fine control in your thumbs, because it's pretty hard to hold down on a direction without rolling up a bit or rolling down a bit accidentally, turning a safe walk into a very unsafe jump. Speaking of stiffness, this also affects other genres too. I've been really into Panel de Pon lately, and in addition to being a brain-heavy puzzle game, you also need the speed and execution required of even the toughest fighting games to move fast enough to build up powerful chains. The stiffness of the D-pad made everything feel noticeably slower than playing on the official Pro Controller, but at the same time, not much slower than the official SNES controller. If you have one of these lying around, then definitely try it out for a good idea of how the Ultimate Controller feels, because it's very, very similar. So you basically have to make a choice. The accidental misinputs of the official Pro Controller, or the stiff, slight slowness of the Ultimate Controller. When it comes to puzzle games, I'm honestly still on the fence. And there's actually one more thing that this official Switch Pro Controller can do that the Ultimate Controller can't do, and it's this. Waking up the Switch by pressing the home button on this controller. Now, I'd like to say that this isn't actually a really big deal, but it's such an integral part of the modern console gaming experience. Not having to walk up to the console itself to press the button, it really does kill the experience, and it's something that these third-party controllers like the Ultimate Controller just can't do. So unfortunately, the experience really is that I pick up my official Pro Controller, press the home button on here, wake up the Nintendo Switch, then I go into the menu and I change in the settings menu from the main official Pro Controller to use the Ultimate Controller. And so every time I want to use the Ultimate Controller, I end up using the Pro Controller anyway, just to wake up the Switch, and yeah, it kills the experience a bit. That being said, the Ultimate Controller has one trick up its sleeve which completely makes up for its inability to wake up the Switch, and that's the included 2.4G wireless dongle. If you only play on Switch, then this won't make much difference to you, but having two separate forms of connectivity means that you can be paired to two different handhelds without having to go through the boring process of unpairing and repairing controllers over and over again. Personally, I have the Ultimate Controller paired to the Switch via Bluetooth, but just by flicking the Switch on the back to a 2.4G wireless mode, I can connect to my Steam Deck or Asus ROG Ally for PC gaming, all without the need to do any unpairing or repairing in Bluetooth menus, which, let's face it, sometimes don't even find the controller properly because Bluetooth on Windows is a major headache. The included Wi-Fi dongle means you can bypass Bluetooth pairing entirely. Well, that's basically it for the Ultimate Controller from 8BitDo. I have no idea how they did it at this price point, because this basically outshines the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller in almost every aspect for the same price. With this docking station and the smartphone app for customization and two back buttons, it really does give controllers twice or three times its cost a real run for their money. Subscribe if you loved it, like the video if you haven't done so already, and comment below on which controller you think did it better, the official Nintendo Switch Pro Controller or this, the Ultimate Controller from 8BitDo. Be sure to check out this video next if you need a great pad controller. That's all I've got time for today. I've been NihongoGamer, and I'll see you real soon.